Welcome to part 2 of PixInsight as easy as 1, 2, 3. In part 1, we did the stacking, we got the introduction about the user interface, and now we're ready to start processing. And we're doing that right after the trailer. Hey, this is View into Space. I'm Sascha from Switzerland, so grüezi miteinander, and thanks for watching my channel. So in this part 2, we look at a basic workflow. And what I mean with that is on one side, we really focus on the easiest way how to process a picture so that we achieve from our freshly stacked picture a picture which we can share, which we can look at. But it also includes that we really look at the fundamental processes and activities that there are in PixInsight. And as I mentioned last time, I would like you to work with me here so that simultaneously to what I show in the video, that you try that right on your PixInsight version. You can do that with your own picture. You can do that with the Pleiades version, which you have already stacked in the last part. Or I even have for you already the stacked version available. You can find that, as I mentioned last time, on my Patreon page together with the booklet, where everything that I explain now in the video will be step by step explained. So also in the future you can have that on your side when you do the processing. And given the 7-day trial period, you can, if you do not want to pay, also access my Patreon channel for free and download it. But obviously, I appreciate if you stay for a while with us for the price of a coffee each month. With that, let's get to the computer and let's get going. Okay, and welcome back on my computer. So we actually start again where we left off the last time. So we stacked this beautiful, beautiful picture of the Pleiades, and I mean that with a certain amount of irony. This is only 20 minutes integration time. There were so much clouds at this time. I didn't have a lot of time. But it is what it is. It's the Pleiades. So as stated, we stacked it, we opened it, it was very green, and so we used the screen transfer function to actually bring it to a state where it is right now by actually unlinking the channel. And with that, getting rid of this green cast. So with that, we really start with the processing. And the first thing we always do with a picture like that is gradient removal. So what do I mean with gradient? I think it is very visible in this picture that you see here a lot of light pollution. I would assume probably that the moon was quite bright this night. It is all over. That doesn't look nice. So we want to get rid of all this bright stuff so that only the Pleiades shine and their nebulae, and that otherwise we have a dark sky. So PixInsight offers different ways how to do that, and in this tutorial we always choose the easiest way, and you will see you get quite far by going easy. And then in the third part, we raise then the difficulty level a tiny little bit and get even a little bit better. So what's the easiest way to remove this mess? It is called Automatic Background Extractor. And we find it here, Process, All Processes, Automatic Background Extractor. Now, as with any of these processes, there's a million of things you can change. Even that's the easiest one. The good news is, in most cases, you do not have to change anything. And that's here the case. It is called Automatic Background Extractor, so we want to have something automatic. So you leave everything as it is, except here Target Image Correction. You just choose here Subtraction. And that is all that we're doing. We take our little triangle and throw it on there. Now you see this crazy code here starts running. The only thing that it helps you with the percentages, you see a little bit how far it actually is progressed. Otherwise, nobody cares. So we get two pictures back. Again, they're not stretched, so the dark, you see that here, no green line. If we start with the other one here and we actually stretch this, again with the nuclear sign, you see actually what it removed and how bright it is. You see here it's bright, here it's bright. You see here was the darkest center, and all around here, all this brightness, that's what it removed. This is more for information. We see what happened, then we can close it. So now let's actually auto stretch here the revised version. And you see most of this light pollution has gone. It's quite a striking difference, and we can actually move it on top. And now you see it very nicely. So all this stuff here in the corners, it's gone except of here. Looks much, much better. So we can close this down. We do not need that anymore. Now you might be saying, nice, but there's still some stuff here. How do I get rid of that? And the answer is, just do it again. We just throw the triangle on there again, and let it run again. Let's see. Let's see again what it has done. And you see now here, it removed it. It also found some other still spots where there was some light. So let's again stretch the result. Okay, let's put them on top again and see what happens. Didn't happen that much anymore, but we see especially here, it removed it still. So it's still got a little bit more even. Okay, remove that too and keep that. It's not perfect, but given the extent that we had, quite a lot of the stuff got removed. As stated in part 3 of the tutorial, you will see an even better method, but in cases where you do not have that much gradient, this automatic background extractor usually works very well with just standard gradients, and it's very easy, very fast. Okay, as next comes the most complicated step of this whole process, and actually even in part 3 we do nothing as complex as what we do right now. So get your seatbelt on and just follow along with me. So this process is called SPCC, and that stands for Spectro Photometric Color Calibration. This is a rather new process in PixInsight. And what it does is it actually looks each and every star in your picture up in a Gaia database and looks what this star should have for a color. And then it color calibrates your picture that way that each star really has the color that it should have in reality. But it goes even further. It actually takes into account your camera chip, your filter, to get it the absolute accurate way. And so SPCC is over all softwares the most accurate way to color calibrate your picture. And it really sets PixInsight apart from anything else. So we should by any means make use of that. And now you might remember that I asked you in part 1 to download the 60 gigabytes. And I hope you did that. And if you didn't, please interrupt this video now. First download the 60 gigabytes, and then we meet again, because you really need it right now. So I assume you put it somewhere where you still have disk space. And what we're now going to do is we go into Process, and to make it a little bit easier, just go here Astrometry and Gaia and open this one. Another crazy complex process. And we do not have to change anything here. All we're doing is you go down here at the very bottom at the second most right symbol, which is called Preferences. I already have stuff in there. You go now here, Data Release to Gaia DR3 SP. Very important. Once you have done that, you click down here on Select. And now here, you actually select the directory where you have now all these downloaded files. You mark them all and you say Open. And then they're in here. And when they are in here, just say OK. And that's it. Now you can actually close it down again and it's done. Now you're ready. Because in these 60 gigabytes is exactly what I described. It's the information of each and every star, what color it has. And that is what SPCC needs to be able to perform. Now there is something else what SPCC needs. It needs a plate-solved picture. So it needs already to know where in the sky this is. So the coordinates of each and every star. Now WBPP does that for you. In the process of stacking, it plate solves the picture and puts the data in the metadata. But first of all, it might fail. Happens that it just is not enough stars or whatever and they cannot plate solve it. Second, you might not stack in WBP. You might use Deep Space Stacker or AstroPixel Processor or whatever. If you do that, the information is not available. Or you might not have followed my steps and already thought, just crop a little bit more. As soon as you crop, the solution is gone. So it doesn't know anymore where it is. In all of these cases, you can replate solve it. And we will look at that in the third part of our tutorial. At the moment, I assume you stacked, like we discussed in part 1 in WBPP, and it plate solved it correctly for you. So we go now to Process, Spectro Photometry, and there's the Spectro Photometric color calibration. So how we proceed now depends on the filter and also if you're shooting mono or one-shot color. Now I assume in this whole tutorial that you're using one-shot color, because if you would use mono anyway, the whole workflow would be much more complex. So when we talk about one-shot color, you have two options. Either you shoot either with no filter or with a light pollution filter like an Optolong L Pro, for example, or you're shooting dual narrowband like an L Extreme, L Ultimate, or Antlia ALPT, something like that. So I'll show you these two examples. Let's start first with the situation we have here. I shot this with an Optolong L Pro. In this case, white reference, we leave where it is, average spiral galaxy. The concept is here that we assume that in an average spiral galaxy, all kind of stars are actually existing, and so the average is white. The next QE curve. Here we can actually enter the sensor of our camera. If you do not know it, just look it up at the website of your camera producer. For me, example, it's the Sony IMX571 for a 2600 MC camera. The filters, just leave it exactly like it is. This is just also the standard for one-shot color camera. Now let's assume I would have used, for example, my Antlia ALPT. So I would have shot dual narrowband. Then in white reference, I would go and choose photon flux. The QE curve I would leave at ideal QE curve. It's the default. And with these here, I would actually use Antlia ALPT. Or you see they also have the L Enhance, L Extreme, or L Ultimate, or the Butter, UHC5. So I would choose for all three this here. I would not choose here the narrowband filter mode because that's in principle for one-shot color. Or if your filter here is not stated, you could actually, for each of the red, green, and blue, enter the frequency and also the bandwidth. So that would be for dual narrowband. Now actually I reset that. And that's now for my Optolong, as before stated, what I should use. Now with the background neutralizations, I have two routes how I can go. In a picture like that, where most is actually background with stars, I can just leave it default like this. But let's assume I have tons of nebula here. So most of the picture is actually covered in some nebula. Then it's hard for SPC to know what is actually the background? And in such a situation, it makes sense to create a preview. Now, how do I do that? Now, you see up here, right beside these arrows, this little door. You click that, and when you now go on the screen, you see you have now these crosshairs. So you choose now a place in your picture that's really nice background. For example, here, not too many stars, rather black or here is a good part. So let's just take here a little bit. We say this is our background, preview 1. And by the way, you see now you have another side tab here, and I can even click that. That's my preview here. Okay, now I actually go here on region of interest. I say from preview, and I select this preview that I have here and say, okay. And now I actually tell the process what really the background is. And with that, I'll take the triangle and throw it on there. And SPCC does its magic. Okay, and it's done. And what you get here is this white balance function. And when all these dots are right on the line, this is between red and green, this is between blue and green. And when they are like that, it shows that it really was successful. Once again, this is just for our information. It means that we actually entered everything correctly also here, so that's fine. We can close the SPCC process. We can, by the way, also close this preview by right-clicking at the preview tab and stating delete. And if you wonder what did really change, let's go back with an undo and forward again, and you see the difference. It's massive. So we have now really already the blue of the Pleiades starting to show. So with that, I can congratulate you. You can pat yourself on the back because you have already actually done the most difficult part. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to stretch it. Because remember, if you go here on the red cross, it's still unstretched. It's still pitch black. So when it comes to stretching, there's about 1 million ways how you can stretch the picture. So what does stretching really mean? And we open now the 2 processes that we anyway need for this very easy stretch. We go to process, all processes, and then we go to histogram transformation. Please open this process. This is the number 1. Then we go again to process, all processes. You go all the way down to screen transfer function. We already opened that before. So here you have it again. Just place them below each other. We will need that in a moment. But let's first think about what does actually stretching mean. Please go here in the histogram transformation to no view selected and choose your picture. So this is now the histogram of our picture. And it's down to here. It's pitch black. There's just nothing. And only here in this little part, this little dark part, there are these few stars. Now, when actually the picture has to show the whole spectrum from 0 to full luminosity, given that most of it is actually empty, the picture will look black. This is like neglectable. So we actually have to stretch. We have to stretch it that this occupies most of our picture. And that is what stretching is. And this sounds easy, but it is kind of an art to actually really do it in a way where no information is destroyed and you can see things in the right brightness. The right brightness of the foreground, of the main object, but also of the stars of the background. Now again, in part 3, I will show you more complex kind of stretches. At the moment, we do it exactly like this stretch here, this auto stretch, because this can be made permanent. The first process we have to manipulate something on is the screen transfer function. We can at the moment ignore the histogram transformation. Now what we do here is we press again on the nuclear button, and there is one thing absolutely crucial. At this point of time, the link RGB channels button has to be selected, because remember, we unselected it before to get the green cast away. But if it's now still unselected and we press the nuclear button, this here happens. You see, everything gets green again. So we actually would lose the full color calibration which we have just done. From that point of view, it's extremely important that this is linked, and when it is linked, it looks right. Now the Pleiades are blue, and that's how they should appear. Now there's another issue with this stretch. The screen transfer function has a tendency to be too bright. And I think we easily see that, especially in the background here. This background is way too bright, and especially in this case, where we still have some residual gradients which we did not get out with the automatic background extractor, it looks odd. So we want to get that away right away with this stretch. So what you do is you go here on the plus sign on the magnifying glass. You go right to the edge here and you click. It doesn't matter on which band you do it, red, green, or blue. And we do it as long until we can actually see here these distinct line. Now we change again back to the arrow. And now we take the midtones and we start to move them to the right. And what you see now is it gets darker. And we should not overdo that. What is absolutely crucial, you see here this nebulosity. And we definitely do not want to lose the nebulosity. So when we actually go down now, we have this nebulosity in our eyes. And we stop before these start to diminish. And I think I wouldn't go more down than about like that. We can still correct that in other ways, but it's already much, much better than before. Okay, with that, we can actually make that permanent. And for that, we take this triangle, and now watch carefully. I take the triangle, drag and drop it here on the histogram transformation on the lower bar. And if you actually have selected here, still the right picture, this one, then you see now up here how we have the curves. And you see here on this side, on the dark side, we are really right on the edge. So we should not have, for example, shifted these here. We would have actually clipped the picture. Some information would have been lost. But by shifting the midtones, we didn't lose anything. Now that we actually transferred the information from the screen transfer function to the histogram transformation, we can now take the arrow here and throw it on the picture. And the picture gets immediately white because actually we put stretch on top of the auto stretch. But if you go now up here and click on the red cross, now we have it stretched. And there's no more green line. So this is now a permanent stretch. And that looks pretty nice and is a very good start for our further endeavor. At this point, we can close both the screen transfer function and the histogram transformation. We will not need them anymore. So the next process we need is the curve transformation. Curve transformation here. And I'm sure you have already come along the curve transformation in other softwares, and this works about the same. The important part here is that you click here on the real-time preview, otherwise you will not see what you're doing, and that's quite important here. And now the first thing we want to do, we want to still get the nebulas a little bit brighter, but the background still a little bit darker. And we can do that with a so-called S-curve. For that, ensure that we're here on an RGBK. That's also the default, so it should usually be like that. Now on the picture, we're clicking on the nebula. We keep the left mouse button down and we start moving around. And what you see now is about the area where this nebulosity is, while the star background is a little bit lower. It's around. So this is important to know because usually what you would do, you would put the center of the S-curve in the middle here, then you would drag this here down, this here up. And well, we probably would get the stars brighter, but we would not get the nebulosity brighter. And that's exactly what you see here. If I drag this down, we're actually losing the nebulosity and the stars shine overly bright. So that's definitely not what we want to do. So with this knowledge, what we have, that actually the nebulosity is around here, we actually set the center right below. Now I drag this here down, and now you see what happens. The nebula is now nice and bright, and the background gets really dark. So we're implementing that. The other thing which we can do, as you can see, this nebula is blue, but it's a bluish green. And I could say I want to have this a little bit more on the bluish side. And if we go back here to U, it's a second to the right. What I do now, first of all, I do some control points. I usually, if I do not want to use some dynamics, but do something very distinctively, I like to do that to fixate the curve, that it doesn't go off at a place where I don't want it to. Okay, so here we can now take the green and move it up to the blue. Now that's nice. So obviously, interventions like that, you could ask, is this now still scientific? Do I actually cheat here? Is this just art? So that's a long question, and we would go down rather deep into the rabbit hole. But we have some artistic freedom, and I usually tend to exploit that, especially in situations like that. So we apply that now too. Okay, we close it down. We close the real-time preview down, and here we are. Now, the next thing we're going to do, we start using masks. And mask is something you will use again and again and again in PixInsight. And there's many different forms of masks, and for today we use the easiest ones, but I want to start to give you an idea how we deal in PixInsight with masks. For that we go into Process, All Processes, we go down to Range Selection. In range selection, we also open the preview and you get a white picture. Now you go to lower limit and you start dragging this to the right. And now you see something start to appear. Now for this example, we work here primarily with the nebulas and with the stars. So we have to be careful that the nebulas are still included, that the stars are still included. And you can see you have two other options here, fuzziness and smoothness. With smoothness, I smooth the whole thing a little bit out. Smoothing out is great if I do not need the stars, and you see it right then. Because of it blurs everything, the stars go away. So I could, for example, do here something only for the main stars and the nebulosity. Here actually we want to only do one mask, so we want to deal with both here, so we keep it about like that. And we can also always use here this real-time button to see if we feel that what we need is actually included. I feel I can even include a little bit more, and I'm probably about okay with this mask. With that, I press here the execution button. The mask is created. I can close the preview. I can close the process. Now this here is the mask. It's still pretty bright. It's probably, for my taste, usually too bright, but I will talk at the end about this. For the moment, let's use it. You take here on the left side this tab, you move it down here, let it go, and you minimize the mask. Don't close it down, it has to be open, but you can minimize it and move it away. Now once you have a mask, whatever is actually visible is what is impacted, whatever is red is protected. And that's exactly how we want to have it. We want to work with the nebulosity, we want to work with the stars, and we want to leave the background as much as possible not impacted. Up here we have the buttons for the mask. With the third one here, which looks like a black and white sign, I can invert the mask. So this is the opposite now. So here the background is more or less visible and the rest is protected. And the other interesting one is the one with the magnifying glass here at the end. If I click it, it goes away. You can see here the side tab is still red, which means the mask is still active, but I can see how the picture looks like. So there's two things we want to do. And the first one is saturation. So we go to color saturation. We press here the real-time preview, and now you see the picture looks as usual. So it's not impacted by the mask, so I can nicely see what happens all over the picture. Why do I even open color saturation? Because I made now this nebulosity a little bluer, but I would also like to have this blue a little bit more, having a little bit stronger. So that's what we're going to do now. And we use that also to learn now this color saturation process, which is quite an interesting process. So the first thing you see down here is the rainbow color from red to yellow to green. And there's the curve who states if a color is more pronounced or less pronounced. So the issue is we do not really want to deal with green. We want to deal with blue mainly. It might be a little bit inconvenient having it over here. So in this U shift, I can now take this, move it to the right, and you see this rainbow starts to move. And I move it until blue is right in the middle. So now I can work much better with it. The next thing I do is what you also have seen in the curves. I do control points. I really like doing that because it just ensures that not by accident anything else moves. And we want to work here with the blue. So the blue is about from here to here. And this is we move up now. Up here, and you see you have a much more saturated blue. Now this is a question of taste, and you can do this more or less, but for changing distinctively the saturation of one color or the other, this is way the better process than the curve transformation, because with the curve transformation, from a saturation point of view, you can only move everything up or down. And here you can really do it perfectly for one color or the other. With that, we execute that. We close the preview, we close the process, and we keep the mask still on. Next process is the unsharp mask. The unsharp mask is the sharpening tool of PixInsight. We again open here a real-time preview. Again, we're seeing the whole thing without the mask and already with a default sharpening applied. So when I now take away the real-time preview, you see the difference. It's not massive, but it's there. There's actually more stars and the nebulas are a little bit more distinct. Now I usually like to do some sharpening, but I don't like to overdo it. So for me, this default is about exactly what makes sense. So I click here the apply button and this is done. I can close the unsharp process and I can also close the real-time preview. And when it comes to the mask, I can actually here with the red X, I can remove it. And here we go. This is our final image of part 2. Let's save it. Now when you actually save something like that, if you want to still keep it for further processing, save it again as an XISF. For usage, for moving in other applications, for sharing it, I would always start with a TIFF. And from a TIFF you can also convert it then to a JPEG, a PNG and whatever you need for social media and so on. Now let's have a look at this picture. Is it good? I would say it's okay. It's the Pleiades, the nebulas are in there. We have to remember, this is only 20 minutes integration time. So if we would have an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours integration time, the nebula would be much, much more pronounced. So that's not a problem of our processing, that's a problem of the picture. But I stated I wanted to take a little bit a challenging picture that makes it interesting. So what else do we see? We see, and that's something that accompanied us through the whole processing, that the gradient is still there. We see that here very nicely, how it's still shining in. We see these bridges kind of, these blobs, and especially in a context where you have such faint nebulae, this is practically impossible to remove it like that now simply with making it darker, because then you destroy the nebula. So what you should learn from that is that while the automatic background extractor for very easy gradients, for just gentle gradients, might do a good job, for a gradient situation like that, it's just not good enough. And that's why in part 3 we'll look at the dynamic background extraction, which is much more effort, a little bit more complex, but it gives much better result. And that you will see is like day and night. And then there's something else which we see, and that's when we zoom in, and that's noise. Lots and lots of noise, which is obvious with 20 minutes integration time. Now what are we going to do about the noise? Now I could obviously have shown you one of the onboard noise reduction tools of PixInsight. But quite honestly, they have all something in common. They're quite complex, and compared to some other tools and scripts, they're quite ineffective. And so I didn't find it necessary to confuse and overload you with that here. But I will show you the perfect way how to deal with noise in part 3. And if you're asking, so what is possible in part 3? What's really the difference? That is the difference. That is the final picture that I processed with the techniques that I will show you in part 3. And I think we can agree there's a massive difference. And you will be able to do that after part 3. Okay, and we are at the end of part 2. If you're now a little bit underwhelmed, if you would hoped to be already a little bit further, let me assure that we get there in part 3. But this was crucial. On one side, it's important that you have these easy tools on your tool belt because they are foundational. You will use them no matter how many additional advanced tools you also acquire. And so all we're actually doing next time is we exchange one or two of these processes with a more advanced version, and we add a few more processes which will exponentially increase the quality of your pictures. So I hope to see you again in part 3, and until then, clear skies.